Today is Valentine's Day. And I have scoured the annals of history to pull out some interesting factoids about Valentine's Day that you can impress your friends with as you're interacting with. For instance, I got some pictures to kind of go along with this. The Emperor, Roman Emperor Claudius II. You can go ahead and throw that picture up there, too. There it is. Claudius II was the emperor who followed Claudius I. Born in 210 AD, and he died in 270. He became emperor in 268 AD, so he really only was reigning for 3 years. But he was known to be a very militaristic emperor. He was big on conquering the enemies and defending Rome, and actually was fairly successful at it. But he believed sincerely that single men made the best warriors. They were unfettered by the complication of having a family to worry about, a wife, and so on and so forth. So he outlawed, during wartime, he outlawed marriage. Now there was a priest in the formalized church, what existed at that time, by the name of Valentine. His last name was Valentine. And he defied that order and continued to marry those who would want to be married. He was arrested for that and thrown into prison and later executed. He wasn't executed because he defied that order necessarily. His real crime was he aided in helping Christians who were arrested to be tortured by the Romans and recant their faith. He aided them in escaping the prisons. And when he was caught in doing that, they then executed him for that. But it's thought that he may have actually written the first Valentine, because right before he was executed, he had a note that was delivered to the jailer's daughter, who often would come and comfort him, and he had not a romantic relationship necessarily with her, because she was quite a bit younger than he was, but just a friendship. And he signed his note, "Your darling Valentine," meaning this is who he was, not the fact that he was her Valentine. But that may have been the first Valentine card ever given. We don't know. Sometime later, the church actually instituted a celebration known as Valentine's Day to commemorate this saint. And it wasn't until, I got the date here, 1537 that King Henry VII actually made it a legal holiday, calling it St. Valentine's Day on February 14th.
I can't help it. So when you're saying to someone, "Be my Valentine," you're hoping they're arrested and executed.
I wasn't going to go there, but yes, you're probably right. Yeah. Now, you know, the church oftentimes is guilty of, or I don't call it guilty, but they are guilty of it. But I think it's strategic, putting holidays to celebrate, Christian holidays, on top of pagan holidays to try to help people focus instead of on pagan things, on Christian things. So the date of February 14th also was a pagan holiday, and the name of that was Lupercalia. Lupercalia. And what would happen is that the Roman priests, pagan priests, on this day would gather at a cave that they believed was the actual cave that Romulus and Remus, remember they're the twins who found Rome, or at least they're saying they found Rome, that's what their legend says, were raised by a she-wolf, hence the Lupa influence there. And so they would gather there, and they were known as the Lupercalia, I think it is, this group of priests that worshipped and celebrated this particular festival, pagan festival. And what they would do is they would sacrifice a goat for fertility reasons, and then they would sacrifice a dog for purity reasons. And the mixture of that. Yeah, I know. See, these guys. And they would take the goat hide, skin it, and cut it into strips, and dip it in the blood of the sacrifice, and then they would gently whip women and crops with it. And in fact, this wasn't something that women ran from. Oh! they actually wanted to be whipped with these goat pieces of hide because they believed that in that coming year they would become much more fertile because of this. And so it may be that the church actually wanted to try to overpower this fertility pagan ritual by celebrating Valentine's Day, which really is focused more on the love that this priest had shown to try to rescue Christians who were marked for death or torture and so on and so forth. The color red is a Valentine color, is it not? Where did that come from? Well, because blood is red. And they believed, many cultures have believed for some time, that love originates in the heart, which pumps the blood, hence the red color. Lace is associated with Valentine's Day, is it not? You know, white lace and Valentine's. You can get one of those, remember those old cards and those old, the doilies and all that sort of thing? That has been there for a long time. Well, it actually, the word where we get our word lace from, the Latin word, literally means to catch. And it's the idea of lace is, at least as associates with Valentine's Day, was the idea of catching a heart. Snagging somebody's heart as your own. Okay. During the Middle Ages, men and women would put their names, various names, into a bowl, and they would draw them out, and that would be their Valentine. For the week before this date, February 14th, they would wear that name on their sleeves. I have pictures for all of this too. Is that coming through? Man, I spent 5 hours this week. Yeah,
Draw a heart.
you can draw a heart? Okay. And they would wear it on their sleeve. Hence, we get this phrase, wearing your heart on your sleeve, comes from that expression. About 1 billion Valentines are exchanged every year, making Valentine's Day the second largest card giving day of the year. Guess what the first one is? No.
Father's Day.
Christmas is right. Christmas, about 2 billion cards are given. Because not everybody has a Valentine. Physicians in the 1800s recommended to patients regularly that they should eat chocolate when they suffered from depression because of the loss of a loved one, or a love relationship that went south, whatever, and they felt the effects of that. They recommended that they eat chocolate in order to remedy that, because that makes sense. Chocolate is yummy, but also it has a lot of what in it? Exactly. It releases the endorphins. No sugar, you get a sugar high. Of course, it really didn't help when you came off the sugar high, because you were kind of in a worse state, but that's what they used to do. And so over the years, chocolate became associated, the giving of chocolate, with Valentine's Day. One more factoid, 220,000 couples on average get engaged on Valentine's Day. 220,000 on average. So some years it's higher than that. Get engaged on Valentine's Day. Now, all of this hoopla about Valentine's Day, I'm sure there are things that you have in mind, if you haven't already given your Valentine, that maybe you're going to or do today. It's one of those holidays that really ties us guys up in knots because we're afraid we're going to really blow it somehow. Invariably, what ends up happening across the country is you have a lot of expressions, and we'll have a lot of expressions today of love. And not all of those expressions of love are going to actually come from something that truly is inside. Because the rest of the year, those expressions may not be there. But they're there in a big way today. Now, you talk to any lady, and ladies, you can verify this for me if you want, but my experience has been, every lady that I have talked to, the idea of having an expression of love on a daily basis that comes from what truly is felt inside, even in the smallest ways, is much more effective and meaningful than a huge expression in some sort of extravagant gesture that never is accompanied the rest of the year by other things. Somehow it becomes ineffective. And this is important because, for us today, because what we're going to talk about isn't necessarily a Valentine's theme, but it does relate to some of this issue that we're talking about right now. And that is the giving of our resources. Most of you know I don't talk a lot about giving. Some churches and some pastors, and I'm not putting them down, I'm simply just stating fact, they spend a lot more time talking about the need to give. In fact, you should be giving. Then maybe I should talk more about that, but I don't. But part of the reason why I don't is because we have a lot of misconception about the whole act of giving, what it's about. We have so many people in our history, especially in the history of this country, people who have called themselves Christians, called themselves ministers of the gospel, who have taken advantage of people and given to promote themselves, to promote their own agendas, to line their own pockets. We still have them today. It's, I think, a travesty to see some of these people harangue people who barely can put 2 cents together to give and give and give, and yet they drive around in opulence and live in opulence. Now, I'm not against ministers having nice things, don't get me wrong. But at some point, it gets out of control. We've had a lot of that. We see that. And so because of that, a lot of people are very negative to any kind of giving message. And I think that's unfortunate because the truth is, what really is behind God asking us to give is not the money. It's what it's doing to us. Let me demonstrate that by having you turn to Matthew chapter 6, the Sermon on the Mount, verse 1, starting in verse 1, we're going to read the first 4 verses. Jesus speaking says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. So then, you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be honored by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." Jesus' first point there is that it is possible, in fact, it is often the case, that the actions that we do, that we consider good actions, spiritual actions, can be done for appearance sake and not out of proper motive. We can do them in such a way so that others might see that and have the natural response of thinking about it. Oh, you must be really spiritual. And he's warning against that. That's the first general principle he's laying down here in chapter 6. There is that possibility. So it's very important that you understand there is a proper reason to do something, and then there is an improper reason. And when your focus is doing it so that others might see it, so that you might be labeled a certain way or called something special, or that people might have a certain feeling about you because of what you do, or even that you might have a certain feeling about yourself because of what you're doing, that is an improper motive. And really, what does the proper motive look like? Well, he gives one illustration of this. Now, he isn't just talking about giving at this point. He's talking about generally how we live our lives. Because he'll go and he'll use giving as an illustration, he'll use fasting as an illustration, and he'll use prayer as an illustration. Okay, so Now, as he uses giving as an illustration here in the rest of verses 1 through 4, he says, so when you give, how are you to give? Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Now, I mean, come on. Is that really possible? Well, what he is saying, it's a euphemism. It's a figure of speech. It is really saying this. Don't let your focus be on what you're doing. Let your focus be on the motivation, the impetus inside for doing what you're doing. If what you're doing is to express God's love, then whether somebody sees it or not, whether the person that receives it honors it as such or not, doesn't matter. Because your motive is to express God's love. It's to honor God. So don't let your left hand be aware of what the right hand's doing, because the left hand might say, well, I don't think we're getting enough credit for that. So let's go tell some people about what we're doing. Let's do it in a more demonstrative way. Let's withhold what we're doing until the proper time when we do what we do, it's going to be really a big thing. See, the left hand has a tendency to do that. You got to watch the left hand. Right when the right hand's doing stuff, the left hand might jump in. That's why you always have to watch out for left-handed people. Nah, I'm just kidding. You knew I was going there, didn't you? All right, so that's the first principle Jesus wants us to understand. So hang on to that in your head. Let's go a little bit further. After he talks about fasting and after he talks about prayer, in much the same vein, showing how we are to do these actions not for the way people see them or the way they make us feel or any of that kind of stuff, but for the right reason, the right motivation. We get back to this concept, this idea of giving. And Jesus spends some time on this. And there's a reason why he does it. Verse 19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So this next principle that Jesus is going to kind of lay down, he's actually still laying down on the foundation that he started with in chapter 6, verse 1. Contextually, he hasn't really gone too far from that, so we need to keep that in our heads, in our thinking. What is he saying? He's saying that in reality, there are two different kinds of treasure in our lives. Or better stated, there are two different kinds of things we can look at as being treasure in our lives. There are the things that are of this earth. And we have a lot of them, don't we? A lot of great things. And his point is that you've got these two. You've got things of this earth, and then you've got treasures of heaven, things that are eternal in nature. And Jesus' point is not to say, these treasures that are on earth they're easily lost. I mean, he is making that point, but that's not the only point he's making. By saying, thieves can break in and steal them, they'll rust, they'll wear out, moths can eat them up, whatever it is. It's susceptible to corruption of various kinds. He is saying that, but his point is even more pointed, as to say the contrast between the things that are on earth and the things that are in heaven, where you don't have moth, rust, or thieves, is to say one is passing and one is eternal. One has only passing value, the other has eternal value. It never goes away. And one is way down on the list when it comes to real value in the eyes of God, and one is way at the top of the list when it comes to real value in the eyes of God. So Jesus is saying, you can be all about what this world has to offer. You can be all about making sure, your coffers are full, making sure the things that are part of your lifestyle are in place, making sure everything's protected that's here on earth. And, and there's nothing wrong with things like that, like insurance and things like that. I'm not trying to preach down on those. But what I'm trying to say is that we can be all about that and miss what we really should be all about. Because Jesus' point is going to be later on, God actually is taking care of us when it comes to the earthly things. Doesn't mean you don't have to work. He'll provide you an opportunity to work to make ends meet, but you don't have to worry about those things. You don't have to be about those things. Those don't have to be your treasure, what you value the most. Instead, things that matter, your relationships with other people. You know why that matters? Because those people are eternal. You have somebody that you really are butting heads with, especially if they're a believer, guess what you're going to do for eternity? I don't think heaven is that big of a place. These are eternal things. God's glory, that's eternal. You becoming like Jesus, expressing the fruits of the Spirit like Jesus did, those are eternal things. So those are much greater values. Now, to kind of make this point even more, I just turn you to attention to Luke chapter 12, starting verse 13. This is a parable that Jesus spoke, and apparently he was in a crowd talking at one point, and somebody said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to a man, "Who appointed me a judge or arbiter over you?" Then he said to him, "Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. For not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions." Catch that. Not even when you have a lot. See, here's the thing. Those of us who don't have a lot, which, is a relative thing, because everybody in this room is probably going to think we really don't have a lot compared to, a Donald Trump. I'd say he has a lot. He has his own jet. I don't have a jet. I got a toy jet. It's on a keychain. But he has his own jet that actually goes somewhere. Mine only goes somewhere if I take it in my pocket. And but you know what? There are people in this world who look at me, or would look at me, and say, "Wow, you have a lot." Right? So that's a relative thing. But we would look at our stuff and say, "Yeah, finally I'm getting somewhere in life. I'm getting my retirement packages in place. I know I don't have to worry about my future. When I retire, I've got this nice thing in place here. I've got, all my T's are crossed, all my I's are dotted. I think I'm doing pretty good." Jesus says, beware, because even at that, you're not where you think you are. Well, why is that? Well, he goes on to say, be on guard for greed, for not even in abundance does one's life consist of possessions. And he told them, verse 16, a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself, saying, 'What shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops?' Then he said, 'This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods.'" Now, notice what he's saying is he's basically saying that I will get more of what I already think is worth spending my life on, what I'm treasuring, what I'm holding out as being the most important thing in my life. And then, verse 19, "And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have many goods laid up for you many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and now who will own what you have prepared? So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" You don't know when you're going to die. I don't know when I'm going to die. Solomon wrote about this in Ecclesiastes. Vanity, all is vanity. Really what he was doing is he was looking at life and he's saying, here's what it comes down to. You can work really hard. You can amass a great deal of money and a great deal of stuff, and the next day drop dead, and what has it been worth? because your kids will get it and they'll squander it. That's why. He says that. You know, they won't. They haven't earned it. They'll just get it in a big. So what do they? They'll go out and buy a car, or go buy a house, or go out to Disney World for 3 weeks. You know, and spend it all, lavish and living and loving and all that stuff. It's vanity. It's meaningless. Now, Jesus, getting back to the Sermon on the Mount, takes his argument one step further. Now, where does he come? Well, remember, he started out by saying it's possible to do things that are things that we should be doing as believers, but to do them in a way that we're doing them for the wrong motives, for appearance sake, for the way we feel or we want others to feel about us, as opposed to the right motives. And then he's moved from that. He said, no, giving, for instance, you can do your thing and value stuff that really is not that valuable, and not value things that truly are valuable. You get your priorities all messed up. And here is the problem. He says at the end of that, in Matthew 6, verse 24, for where your treasure is, there is your heart also. And what does he mean by that? The heart, as Jesus is using it here, is the idea of the center of our being, the mind, the emotions, the will, all coming together. The inner man, the inner woman, the inner person. The essence of not the physical person, but the spiritual person, the non-physical, all coming together. It's that kind of concept. So he's not just talking about emotions, like the heart, like Valentine's Day heart, but he's talking about that inner person, the real person, who you really are. And where your treasure is, that's where you really will be focused. That's where you really will be at. So it's a heart issue, treasure is. All right? Now, we move on. In Matthew 6, at verse 22, Jesus continues and adds one more idea to this. The eye is the lamp of the body, he says. So that if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? That's not a question, that's a statement. That's bad, he's saying. Darkness, bad. Light, good. Right? Verse 24. Now, no one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve man and wealth, or money, or stuff, or the treasures of this earth. You can substitute any of those things in there, and you're going to be accurate. Now, Jesus' use of the eye, it's somewhat metaphorical, but it's a good one. The eye is the vehicle, the conduit, by which this person who we truly are inside is connected to its treasure, to the things that motivate it, that move it, that make it have value and desire, where it's all seated. The eye is that connection. And Jesus says, you know, if your eye is focused on stuff, the physical things this earth has to offer you, then that's going to directly affect the heart. And it's going to mess you up. He calls it darkness. And it's going to have an effect on you that subtly, and then sometimes not so subtly, distorts everything else in your life. And we can actually think we're serving God when we're really serving ourselves, or serving this treasure that we have in the earth, or something completely different. And the truth is, we're not serving God, we're really serving that. We're really fooling ourselves and think we're doing both. Instead, Jesus said, you know what, it'd be better to get rid of that, if that's the case, than to allow that to continue to happen. Because if the eye is focused on the things of heaven, things of God, upon what truly is of value, what truly is important, then light comes in, and that changes your life. That touches all these different areas. And it starts to do something to you as a person that's good. And you truly come to this place of serving God as you want to. Now, you put all those ideas together. Jesus is saying, very simply, your giving, my giving, is discipleship. It is an act of discipleship. It is training in following Jesus. Because it touches the very center, the very core, as material beings. Our very problem that we have is with the material stuff in our lives. It touches that. And it helps us to make that step of saying, you know what, I am going to trust God. I am going to be focused on God. And these things are going to be secondary in my life, not primary. And that, folks, is the act of a disciple who is willing to take up his cross and follow Jesus, willing to take up her cross and follow Jesus. Now, you could really say, in a true sense, that what applied to last week's message about giving of our time applies to this message, giving of our stuff. You know, last week we said our time, that's really kind of a misnomer. It's not our time. It's time God gives us. It's God's time, ultimately. We simply give back. The same can be said of our stuff. Because it is only God's grace at work that allows us to have the stuff to begin with. You know, that's true even of non-believers. They don't want to think that. Well, God doesn't go to work, at my work, and do my job so I can get paid. No. But the fact that you can take a breath in the morning and get out of bed so you can go to work is only at the whim of God. It's only because He wills it. Even if you're a believer or not. Because God is sovereign. If for one moment God stops thinking of this universe, guess what happens? The glue that holds it all together, it's gone. Our very existence is because of God's will. So that does apply. You hear a lot of people talk about how much should I give then? 10%. 10%. Well, that is true if you're talking about the Old Testament. Actually, it's not true. It was true 1 out of 3 times a year. The real percentage, if you want to really get technical, is about 33%. Almost like our government. Except I think our government has it beat. Because there were 3 10% offerings throughout the year, and then there was one that was given like once every 3 years or so. New Testament doesn't really give a percentage. Nothing is talked about percentage. But it does talk about giving. Jesus began that discussion in what we just saw. He continued that, and the disciples, his apostles, continued that discussion. And so we pick up some criteria that seem to be clear, and I wanted to show you those. First one, it comes from Mark chapter 12, 41 to 44. It's not the only place it's mentioned, but it's a real clear place that Jesus is teaching the disciples again. He says he sat down opposite the treasury and began observing how the people were putting money into the treasury. And many rich people were putting in a large sum. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which amounts to a cent. Calling his disciples to him, he said to them, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all the contributors to the treasury. Everybody else. For they all put in out of their surplus, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she owned, all she had to live on. She gave sacrificially." It cost her something. Now you say, why is that a criteria of the New Testament? Well, what is the point of giving? So God can get your money to use it because He needs it? God doesn't need your money. If you give this morning because you think God needs it, then don't give. It's a bad reason because He doesn't really need it. He could do what we try to do in our own miserable, measly way and fail miserably at doing. He could do it much, much better than we could without even breaking a sweat. But see, his purpose for using us, his purpose for asking us to give, has nothing to do with the end result of it all. It has to do with what is going on inside of us as believers.
Amen.
Because it's an act of discipleship. He's changing us, trying to get us to take our focus off earthly treasures and see the eternal.
Yes.
So that we become more like Christ. This woman had done that. She had got closer to it anyway than all the others. And it wasn't a matter of how much to Jesus. It was a matter of what was motivating that giving. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6 through 7 lists three other criteria which are important in the New Testament. Now, this I say, Paul is speaking to the church of Corinth, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Give a lot, reap a lot. Give little, reap little. Now that's a great savings incentive, right? Spending incentive. Hey, you give us $500, we'll give you $1,000. That's not really what he's saying. I mean, that's what we wanted to say. That's what we want to believe. And there are a lot of people who are teaching that even this morning as we teach about giving. They're saying, you know what? You are faithful and you sacrifice and give God, and he's going to give you back tenfold in terms of the money. And of course, they're using their own lavish lifestyle to demonstrate, see, this is what God has done for us. They're missing the boat. Blessing will come, but the blessing that Paul is talking about here is far greater, far more important and eternal. You will become like Jesus. You'll become like God in the sense of showing his character more clearly. So the second criteria we could say is generosity. Verse 7. Each one must do just as he has purposed in his heart. Giving isn't something you do haphazardly. It's not, oh, I got some extra, I'll throw some extra. There are sometimes offerings that come, free will offering. Somebody comes and says, we should take an offering to help this need. Okay, yeah. But what Paul is talking about here is giving that is planned, that is a part of your daily life. And then a fourth characteristic is listed here. Not grudgingly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Now, why would that be important? Because his whole point is not to get your money or your stuff. It's to change you. And if you're giving cheerfully, what is that a sign of? It's a sign that the motives for giving are right. Let me leave you with this thought. And I hope you'll find this encouraging. Because if you're like me, when I was laying some of this stuff out, I was going, I'm terrible at some of this stuff. I'm miserable. I got so much distance to cover yet before I could say I've arrived by any means. And then I read this passage here, which really encouraged me. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, starting in verse 8. And God is able. And God is able. You're not able, I'm not able, but God is. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that always, having all sufficiency in everything, you may have an abundance for every good deed. As it is written, he scattered abroad and gave to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. Now, he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You catch what he's saying? He is right there with you to help you in your giving. He doesn't want you to do this alone. He's not sitting back going, okay, now, you've got your marching orders, so let's see what you do with them. What are you going to do? No, he's saying, here's really what I want you to do, and you know what? I want to help you do it. Let me in. Let me help you do it. Let me give you the grace that you need. You will be enriched in everything for all liberality, which through us is producing thanksgiving to God. For the ministry of this service is not only fully supplying the needs of the saints, that's secondary, really. Because God could do that without the giving. But is also overflowing through many thanksgivings to God. It is generating a response of people, including you, of giving thanks to God for his bountiful blessings. Amen. In expressing his glory. Because of the proof given by this ministry, they will glorify God for your obedience to your confession of the gospel of Christ and for the liberality of your contribution to them and to all, while they also, by prayer on your behalf, yearn for you because of the surpassing grace of God in you. And then here's the kicker. You never outgive God. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. You know, the force of that is not just you can't explain it, although that is, some of that is there, but it's also the idea that you cannot outgive it. It is so far beyond what we could ever give. Even if we gave everything, we could not outgive it. I just list that as an encouragement to you because God's purpose of giving is to grow Christ-like disciples. That's what makes the giving of our offering probably the most significant spiritual activity that we do every Sunday. But he doesn't call us to do it on our own. Even in that, he offers us his grace.